Hello, everyone, and today it is time for me to discuss and review Big Brother 20. I remember at the time I really loved the season and I thought it was a joy, and I still feel that way, but there's an obvious decline within the season, which, in my opinion, was after the hacker twist ruined Haley's HOH, where everything outside of that just got really, really boring. So, in a way, the season is kind of split into two halves. The first half is arguably some of the best Big Brother in Big Brother history, and there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of strategy, there's a lot of funny moments, there's a lot of crazy moments, and it was just a thrill to watch. But the second half is arguably some of the most molasses, like in the house. Sure, it wasn't as boring as the second half of 16, 19, the early to mid jury portions after the double in 17, or the last third in 18, or even the early to mid portion of the jury in Big Brother 15. But he just really wants to get it over with. And I think it's mainly because a lot of the members of Level 6 themselves aren't really interesting. Despite that, it is eons better than the seasons that came after it, and even some of the seasons that came right before it. But I feel like this is a season where sum of the parts is better than the sum overall. So week 1 isn't a week where there's a whole lot of drama, but the way the eviction played out was just some of the craziest that I've ever seen in Big Brother history. And I also appreciate this week for being the sole season in a 4-season run, so from 18 to 21, where there's no stupid day 1 or day 2 boot. So I do appreciate it for that. Sam talks about being a woman in a male-dominated industry and lives in a camper in her mom's yard, which I guess explains her mentality throughout the season. Tyler talks about being a beach guard and being a huge fan of the show, where he's going to use his appearance to seem dumb. Bailey talks about being Miss Missouri USA and is a flight attendant while claiming that she is nice nasty. Steve talks about being a retired detective and is a university professor for criminal studies and is a fan of the show. Caitlin portrays herself as a love and light person, as she is about essential oils, meditation, and can see auras. Winston is in medical sales, talks about carrying his gun, though apparently he has since stated that all that was scripted by the BB producers, and talks about how he wants to find love, so he was clearly cast to be in a showmance. Angela is a fitness model and an entrepreneur who is underestimated for kicking ass, as she was an athlete and isn't just a pretty face, while also being a fan of the show. JC talks about being a dancer, has a business degree, and has a powerlifting career, and is consistently underestimated. I don't think production intended for Tyler and Angela to have a showmance, and it seemed like they kind of wanted Bailey and Winston to be in a showmance as well, which, wrong man. Tyler and Angela freak out about them being from the same place, which he doesn't like that she's vocal about once they enter the house, but he does mention in the diary room that she is hot, so he was attracted to her. Rachel is a Las Vegas performer who is a hustler and a big fan of the show. Christopher talks about being a former basketball player and is a day trader, so he was doing that from even before Big Brother. And then creating the Swaggy C name 5 years ago. While being a part-time babysitter, Rockstar is a very colorful person who loves festivals and is all about peace, so she is a hippie and mentions being a pagan witch. Brett talks about being an ultimate bro, but is also a security engineer, as he is underestimated for his good looks and doesn't hang out with nerds outside of work. Lovely. Casey is a women's football player, and it's interesting seeing her brother in her intro after watching the challenge. Anne talks about watching the show with her father. Scott, he talks about being a dweeb and never having a kiss, date, all that jazz, and he's also a huge gamer. Haley is a student in psychological brain studies and is a country girl who is underestimated about not being able to get down and dirty, though apparently the country girl thing was scripted by the BB producers as well. Faisal is a substitute teacher and a football coach and talks about his students thinking that he is hot, which is very weird that he's even mentioning this, and he talks about his Muslim heritage while wanting to make power moves, and we see this a lot with his reality TV career. Chris kind of hints at his own demise, criticizing people who are way too alpha. Scotty gains a crush on Haley immediately, which would be important for later. Rockstar is getting close with Caitlyn. Faisal and Swaggy are immediately bonding, and we see Brett wanting to bro with JC. JC is skeptical of Faisal and Swaggy talking, and he thinks that they are up to something. Rachel has a crush on Winston. Faisal and Haley are crushing on one another, where Tyler is feeling off about Steve, which is very important. Tyler is also crushing on Angela, Bailey, and Haley. The first competition has them separating into groups of 8, which would kind of consist of how the alliances for the most part are formed in the season, where whomever wins can save half of the house. Casey gets the punishment from the first group, and Sam has the punishment from the second group, where Sam ends up having to be a robot for half of the first week, or round. We see Swaggy and Bailey getting close, and she's telling him to kind of calm down, since people are starting to see him as intimidating. Because Angela and Swaggy did the best in their competitions, they have to compete, since one of them will choose 8 people to be safe. They have a conversation where he is hoping that they will keep one another safe, but Angela outright mentions that to not get blood on her hands, she's going to save her group. Swaggy wins the competition, and he has to choose between 2 of the groups of 4 that came in together. Despite telling Angela that he would save her, he might have to change that, since he has to choose the groups and not individuals. Casey has to wear a unitard, and I already mentioned Sam's punishment, which also means that she's sequestered elsewhere whilst she's speaking through a robot, which obviously is going to affect how she makes bonds with people during this week. Swaggy obviously decides to save his group, which is himself, Rachel, Brett, and Rockstar, and also saves Scotty, Haley, Casey, and Faisal, where they are all immune for the week/round. Obviously, Angela is pissed off, and so are her group, since they assume that they would be safe. Swaggy overhears Caitlyn and Angela ranting about him in the storage room, and she calms down so she is able to make amends. Swaggy, and I'm referring to Caitlyn, doing this, as she was honest about it. Brett, Winston, Angela, and Rachel are getting close, and Caitlyn is teaching her future allies about how to meditate. Haley and Swaggy are talking about how they are vibing with one another, Rockstar, Faisal, and Caitlyn, so they want to form a 5. The 8 that are not immune are able to compete in the HOH competition, where Tyler ends up winning HOH, which he didn't even want to win. The HOH competition showed people's colors, where they have to target one another, so Sam is not handling this well and is feeling shunned, and Bailey is trying to cover the fact that she's annoyed with Tyler, and the two would have a weird back and forth during their 2 seasons together, but I forgot that I started this early in the season. Winston suggests Rachel and Angela that they form an alliance of 6, which would eventually become level 6, including Brett, Tyler, and Angela. This leaves Tyler with limited options regarding the nominations, since 8 people are safe and he's aligned with most of the people not safe, so he's going to nominate Sam and Steve. And Bailey would be the replacement nominee if anything happens. Sam speaks to Tyler as a robot, and he's getting emotional. And Caitlyn, Swaggy, Rockstar, and Faisal go in the HOH room all together to say to Tyler that nominating Steve and Sam are weak moves, where they pitch for Tyler to nominate Angela and Winston. Them all coming in as a group just makes it clear that they are a group to Tyler. Tyler sees this as Swaggy sending his minions to drop the idea before he came in to finalize the deal, and says that Swaggy isn't slick, and also mentioning his nickname being a element of this, since it's a stupid nickname. Bailey speaks to Tyler to butter him up, and also mentions how close Swaggy is to her. Tyler nominates Sam and Steve for eviction. Tyler is literally crying after nominations, and he mentions that he is faking it, though I don't know if that was the case, based on his future appearances and the comments that he has made about his mental health since the season. And Sam has people in the house come to her in the storage room one-on-one to speak to her, since she's a robot at this point, and she has a very bad conversation with Caitlyn, which I guess would show their affection, which would eventually cause the latter's downfall. Scotty and Steve are getting close, and they mention that they can help with one another's faults. And we start to see more of Swaggy and Bailey's showmans. And it's crazy that it took 20 seasons for there to be a black showman, and it's also crazy that they're the only couple in the season that got married and have children now, and are still together. Casey is annoyed with her punishment, where she has to stay in a room on her own when the necklace that she has spins, and level 6 names the alliance while doing their handshake. Tyler reports that the other side wants Angela as the main target, and Sam is not handling her punishment well, especially when she enters the house as a human, and JC kind of snaps at her for being ungrateful. Swaggy and Faisal try to speak to Brett and Winston, but the latter actively avoids the conversation since he doesn't want to be seen with Faisal and Swaggy. And I find this to be very suspect, since he could have at least pretended to be engaged in their conversation, but he didn't want anything to do with them. And Brett is telling them what they want to hear about the four guys working together. And this would have been an interesting idea for them to have in their back pocket. Brett reports the conversation back to his allies, and the other side name their allies Felty, and this other side being Rockstar, Faisal, Caitlin, Christopher, and Haley. There is the BB Power app twist, which is just something that they have done since around BB15 to add a twist to stretch out the weeks and episode count. Faisal has to eat ham, or a substitute of it due to his religion, and Sam wins the Power app, where she chooses the bonus life, which is a chance to give one of the first three Huskies a chance to return, but if it isn't used, the fourth boot will automatically have a chance to return. JC and Faisal are getting close, and Sam tells Tyler the details of her winning the Power app. Swaggy likes Tyler and wants to bond with him, where he tells Swaggy that Angela is going home if she is on the blog. And Tyler is pretty much spinning this conversation where Swaggy would not want to use the veto if he wins it. And he also says that Bailey would be the replacement nominee and she would stay if she's on the blog. And it's kind of an awkward conversation. Swaggy tells Bailey that Tyler will put her up over Angela as a replacement nominee, and she gets very emotional, which is a sign of how Bailey handles things when things don't go her way in Big Brother, and just reality TV in general. Swaggy suggests for them to distance themselves for game purposes, and that sets her off even more. Bailey attempts to speak to Tyler, and she is emotional in the conversation, where Tyler has to end up calming her down. Tyler tells Steve that he will be safe if he and Sam remain on the block, and hopes to get Steve to not play hard in the veto. Faisal ends up winning the veto, though it was preordained between the two of them, the other person being Tyler. Faisal does not use the veto. Steve is expecting his side, which is the Fateh and Bailey side, to vote for him to stay, and Tyler knows that he needs 7 votes to keep Sam, but they need 1 more vote. Caitlin and Faisal's dynamic is delved into more here, and it's clear that she has a bit of a crush on Faisal, and we also see more of Hazel and Faisal getting close romantically. Caitlin is getting very jealous of seeing Faisal and Haley hanging out, which will be important. Angela and Rachel are shocked and kind of offended that Steve hasn't campaigned to them, even though he feels safe. Level 6's plan on pulling over Caitlin is starting to work, since they don't want to expose the alliance, and they know that she plays emotionally. Caitlin and Bailey walk in on Faisal and Haley making out as she ends up leaving, and walks in to rant about Faisal finding some bracelet, and he spurts out of her, or the bed, in a hilarious manner. Caitlin rants to Tyler about Faisal and Haley making out, and she's jealous because Scotty and Steve are a pair, Bailey and Swaggy are a pair, and Faisal and Haley are a pair, and keeping someone who has no alliances might be smart. And of course, Tyler uses this to his advantage. Steve is evicted in a 7-6 vote, and Caitlin is told 9 hours before the eviction that Swaggy mentioned that she is a cannonball, and Tyler gets her to flip on her entire alliance. Though there were some accounts that Haley and Rockstar knew that Caitlin was thinking about evicting Steve, but they did nothing about it. Steve is kind of weird in the sense that he went home due to a lot of factors that really weren't of his own doing, and in such a weird circumstance. But I don't know how well he would have done had he lasted longer anyways. At the same time, he is honestly one of the most forgettable first boots in Big Brother history, as his personality wasn't very large. He didn't really do much of anything to stand out. So when you think of BB20, it's very easy to forget about him. I guess I'm fine with losing him here, since he didn't offer anything, and he probably wasn't going to offer anything to the season anyways. Week 2 is another week where something that definitely should not have happened ends up happening in the weirdest way possible, and it's just television gold. So Caitlin ends up winning HOH, and the entire Fateh side is pissed off about being blindsided, since they should have had the numbers, and it's essentially the same situation with Ronnie in BB11, where he was the vote that flipped and ended up winning the second HOH, where it probably wasn't the best idea for either one of them to win that HOH. Apparently, Winston told Caitlin to vote out Steve, and she voted after Winston right in the hallway where they go to vote, which isn't allowed, but whatever. And Tyler tells Faisal and Swaggy that an app was used to boot Steve, as he's protecting Caitlin, so he's coming up with any sort of lie that he can. Winston enters the room to mention cool meeting, and Swaggy doesn't appreciate this and asks Winston to repeat himself, so there's a very minor back and forth, but Winston's a coward, so he runs off. Faisal starts his infamous "Who flipped?" saying throughout this season that he'll be known for, but he and Swaggy are a bit nervous. Swaley named their showmate, and Falte is wondering about what Caitlin is going to do, where she tells them Winston, Angela, and Rachel are the options to go home. Tyler uses Sam having the power up to manipulate Caitlin, and she tells him that he wants Winston and Angela up. Sorry, Caitlin tells Tyler that she wants Winston and Angela up, but she is told by Tyler to backdoor Swaggy. Sam tells Caitlin that she has the power up and thanks Caitlin for keeping her, where she tells Winston that Swaggy is getting backdoored, but he needs to be a pawn. Caitlin tells Scotty that she is putting him on the block to send Winston home, where Scotty mentions that it doesn't make sense to nominate your own ally, which he would unfortunately have to deal with in his first demise in the season. Because she's the least trending, Rachel is going to be yelled at for 24 hours, and she cries a lot about how she thinks she's going to be betrayed badly, and the issue is that she just wasn't on the show at all, and this is the case for her entire stay in the season. And Tyler is the top trending, where he chooses the Cloud app, where it keeps himself from going on the block for the next 8 weeks. Scotty tells Faisal and Swaggy that he's going up as a pawn, and they complain about Caitlin, as they're starting to doubt Tyler being on their side. Faisal tells Caitlin to speak to Scotty in hopes for the latter to be off the block, and they both try to get Caitlin to not nominate Scotty, since he's a number for them. Interesting that Faisal has this thought process now, instead of later. Anyways, it doesn't do anything, since Caitlin nominates Scotty and Winston for eviction. Caitlin tells Faisal that she doesn't want him to win the veto, and tells him to not win it, since he is winning too many competitions, but he doesn't see her logic in it, as she knows he won't use it if he wins it. Cody and Jessica come to host the veto competition, and I completely forgot about this, and it's interesting watching them, since they are friends with Swaley, or they became friends with them after the season. Tyler wins the veto and knows that he has to make the big move to get Swaggy backdoored, and he has to use the veto, but Caitlin is getting second thought about making the move. Honestly, I don't really see why Tyler felt the need to backdoor Swaggy now, since Swaggy had implicit trust in him and was giving him a lot of information, and they had the bond, or at least in Swaggy's eyes, they had the bond of losing their fathers when they were teenagers, and I believe Tyler and Swaggy are the exact same age. But it's the thing with Tyler where he does all these manipulative moves that he doesn't have to do, and then cries about being seen as manipulative later. But that's a larger narrative and story point about his reality TV career, so I'll just move on from that. Caitlin tells Faisal that she's putting up Angela, though she feels horrible about lying to him, which she's just doing way more than she should be doing. Caitlin pretty much hints to Haley that she's going to nominate Swaggy, and Haley smiles and agrees with her, instead of trying to convince her to do otherwise, since Haley thinks that it would put her in danger, and she doesn't want to piss anyone off. And this is a huge issue with Haley, is that she's just extremely passive, and we would see this over and over again throughout the season. Haley tells Rockstar that Swaggy is going up, and she's of course pissed off about this, since it makes no sense, where they both mention that Tyler is the one who got Caitlin to do it. I don't even think Rockstar tries to convince Caitlin to not do it, so that's another issue with Rockstar too. Rockstar rants about Tyler to Faisal, who thinks that Angela is going up, but Rockstar doesn't tell him what's about to happen, where she absolutely should have told him what's about to happen, since he most likely would have tried to put a stop to it. Caitlin tells Faisal that she hopes that they can stay friends after this, and he is told that she is putting up Swaggy, and he refuses a hug from her. Tyler takes Scotty off the block, and Caitlin nominates Swaggy for eviction. Rockstar and Faisal are pissed throughout the entire ceremony, and Bailey is shocked, though Caitlin is crying her ass out. What's annoying about this entire movement is that Caitlin had to justify her choices, so she used a lot of microaggressions to justify turning on Swaggy, where it made absolutely no sense, where she could have easily just cleared the air with him and it would have brought them together, but she just didn't care to do that. So Swaggy is pissed off and Scotty is shocked. Caitlin keeps on rambling about how she was quote-unquote defending herself, and she's trying to make it look like she was being bullied, and while she's being comforted by a bunch of people, she could have cleared it up with him. Especially since Swaggy wasn't coming after her, but him telling Tyler that she was becoming a mess and getting rid of her late pre-jury wasn't something he shouldn't have said. But in general, Caitlin is trying to portray herself as the poor white woman victim, to this angry, aggressive black man when he never even acted aggressively towards her, which just really rubs me the wrong way. Bailey decides to hug her and is putting on her pageant face, where she says that she could have cleared it up with Swaggy and that he wasn't coming for her anytime soon. The Fate side realizes that they need 7 votes to win the vote, essentially, and Swaggy realizes that he has to be nice to Caitlyn, since she could be the tie vote, though Rockstar mentions that she isn't going to break the tie for something that she created, which is a good point. Faisal is annoyed with Caitlyn since his two closest allies broke up and his game is in jeopardy now, but she apologizes to him and mentions that she never believed in Falte, which is just another revisionist crap line that Caitlyn is telling herself to justify her bullshit, essentially. Swaggy finally decides to speak to Caitlyn with Tyler in the room and mentions that he swears on his dead dad that he didn't say anything about going after her and he doesn't want to go back to the hood where he's not going to stay in the house with Bailey all summer. After Swaggy leaves, Tyler pushes her back on track about booting him, and Swaggy talks to Sam about being too close-knit, where he didn't show people Christopher, where his mom abandoned him at 3, and he moved a bunch of times in 8 years, and his father died as a teen. Swaggy is evicted in an 8-4 vote. So Swaggy C is definitely very cocky, can be very arrogant, and has done a lot of messy things in the show, and especially outside of the show, since the season ended. At the same time, I remember watching him on the feed, and he was very calm, he wasn't loud, he didn't really cause much drama. So I think that, the Christopher, that's who he really is, but when he went in the diary room, he just started pushing all this arrogance and stuff like that, and I think it comes from insecurity. A part of me feels like he does have potential to do better on another season or another scenario, especially since his departure was due to a bunch of weird circumstances where a swing vote flipped, where she shouldn't have flipped due to being jealous of Faisal hooking up with someone else, and using a power app to kind of influence that choice, and then him being portrayed as the aggressive, angry black man being used by Tyler to get him out. At the same time, Swaggy told way too many people way too much information. He made it known to a lot of people that he was the leader in the house. And because he was showing too much of Swaggy C instead of Christopher, it caused him to not bond with half of the house, where he did have bonds with one half of the house, so I don't know. It would have been interesting to see what he could have done had he lasted a bit longer. Week 3 is one of the weeks where it had a lot of drama and things finally went the way that Falte or the Hive pretty much wanted it to go, for the most part. And there is some semblance of a back and forth. So, Scotty wins HOH and talks about him voting out Swaggy to create paranoia, and despite being in the bottom of the alliance, he wants to work with the same alliance. And it was his idea to wear the Swaggy shirts, though he would later state that he did it because he didn't owe Faisal or Swaggy anything because they were supposed to take Steve off the block. But this is a prime example of Scotty kind of just saying whatever at the moment. Haley mentions that it was Scotty who flipped to Rockstar, and they agreed to not mention it to anyone, though people found out anyways. Bailey is obviously not handling being separated from her future husband well, and it's even worse since it would later be revealed that she was pregnant during this time. Winston and Brett are worried about what Scotty is going to do and hope that 2 members of their alliance don't go up. Rockstar talks to Faisal about the votes, and Rockstar hints to Faisal that it was Scotty, but he thinks that it's ridiculous due to the shirt, so Faisal's starting his own showmance. Faisal asks Caitlyn about the votes, and he ends up walking away in the middle of the conversation, since he asks her if she knew Scotty flipped, and this conversation is just in general very tense. We have a segment about Winston and Brett's bromance, and they mention that they're intentionally playing it up so people think that they are dumbasses. Scotty wants to nominate the brothers, or the bros, and is going to ask them 2 questions about Steve and who they are threatened by, but mentions that it's all an excuse to nominate them, so their answers don't matter. Scotty tells Tyler about how he wants to nominate the 5 people that just so happens to be all of Tyler's allies, and despite Tyler trying to throw Rockstar under the bus, Scotty shuts it down and Tyler realizes that it's a lost cause. Sam speaks to Scotty about how she voted for Winston to stay last week, since he wanted her to stay the week before, which Scotty finds interesting, since Winston told Scotty right after the Steve votes that he voted to keep him. So it was a lie. Angela and Casey told Winston that he needs to convince Scotty that he voted to keep Steve, and Sam enters the conversation to mention that they should have came up with this before she spoke to Steve. Winston freaks out to Brett, who thinks Winston is just overreacting. Winston speaks to Scotty, and in order to do damage control, he tells Scotty that he lied to Sam, but it's sketching Scotty out even more. Brett speaks to him and handles it better, and where he mentions that the person who's manipulating Caitlyn, and Scotty outright mentions that it was Tyler, So he's telling Scotty that it was Haley and Rockstar, and after he leaves, Scotty talks to himself about how charismatic Brett is and how he almost believed what he was selling. Bailey wins the final power app, which is the identity theft, where she can steal someone's HOH at the nomination ceremony, and Haley is the least trending house guest, where it means that she has to read Hamlet out loud for the rest of the week, or at least until she finishes it. Sam tells Tyler and Casey the details of her app, since if she doesn't use it this week, it will automatically give the evictee of next week a chance to come back. Scotty nominates Brett and Winston for eviction. Winston is extremely pissed off that he was nominated, and he continuously calls Scotty a nerd and is acting very aggressively, and Scotty has a tense conversation with the bros where they're very pissed off, which only validates Scotty's nominations. Caitlin tells Winston that he needs to separate himself from Brett and to campaign to people as to why he wants to stay, where he ignores what she says and he's just focused on the veto, though Caitlin was actually giving him very good advice. Winston threatens Scotty very clearly, and after storming out of the room, he speaks to Rachel, who suggests that they need to get Caitlin on the block as the replacement nominee. Here's what annoys me. Winston was the most aggressive man in the house, as he threatened people, he cursed, he started arguments, and he just came off as very intimidating. But no one in the house called him aggressive, but they would continuously say that about Swaggy and Fessel, which just really annoyed me, and is, in my opinion, just shows to the privilege that someone like Winston has, where he can act any sort of way and no one sees him as scary. But other people have to consistently be on their toes. Tyler throws the veto, and Scotty wins the veto, where he has no incentive to use it. Sam ends up cheering up Brett, who's defeated, but he's coming up with a plan to save himself and Winston, which is to throw Caitlin under the bus. Winston wants the two of them to approach Scotty to make a final three in the middle of the night, where they do execute it, mentioning that Caitlin needs to be backdoored since she backdoored one of his closest allies, so he should get his revenge. Scotty tells his allies and Caitlin what the bros did, and Caitlin starts hugely ranting about it before she goes at Brett about throwing her under the bus, not getting the smirks that he and Winston are giving, and how they're supposed to be friends, but Brett and Winston don't give her much of anything. Brett makes fun of Caitlin during the veto ceremony, and Scotty doesn't use the veto. The nominees campaign to the house about why they should stay, and the women in level 6 say to Sam that they want to keep Brett, since he's a good shield for them. We have a scene of Tyler and Caitlin talking, and she's mentioning about how the house is going to boot Brett, but Tyler knows that she is bad for his game, and this reminds me of the Audrey situation, where a group of people keep around the, I don't want to say crazy, but the unpredictable person, thinking that they can use them, but it just gets to the point where they become unpredictable for them as well, and they're too much of a liability. The Faute/Hive side of the house are in the room with Caitlin, and while they don't trust her, they need her vote to get their way in this vote, and she tells them that she is voting out Brett, and she'll get Tyler to do that. Tyler knows that he's the swing vote, and whatever he's going to do will make a bunch of people mad. Brett makes a speech about Rockstar making the 6-5 vote, I'm wanting to make the vote 6-5 and to frame Caitlin, and Rockstar will definitely remember this. Winston is evicted in a 6-5 vote. I remember people had such high thoughts of Winston and high hopes for Winston entering this season, as he seemed relatively level-headed, but as soon as the game started, he was way too paranoid, he freaked out over everything, he caused quite a bit of drama, and he rubbed a lot of the house guests the wrong way, but he never got the aggressive label that many other people who weren't as Anglo-white as he was did, which just really annoyed me. While he probably would have caused more drama had he stayed, and he had one of the bigger personalities of that level 6 group, I definitely see why they booted him, as he was just way too much of a liability, and he wasn't offering much of anything in the house. And he was one of the big targets for the other side as well, so he would have just continued getting nominated. In general, there's really nothing else to say about him, and he's probably one of the worst players of the season. Week 4 is supposedly a calmer week, at least pertaining to the gameplay, because it was Samantha who won HOH, and she wanted things to be as simple as possible, and this was the easiest vote of the season. But there's a whole lot of tension, a whole lot of drama, and a whole lot of stakes, shockingly, in this week, despite it being supposedly so simple. As soon as Winston is evicted, Rockstar lays into Brett about doing this on her daughter's birthday, and she calls him disgusting, and they haven't even spoken in 3 days, where Brett is so calm and tells her to just own it. Caitlin asks Tyler to swear on his father, who is deceased, that he didn't vote out Winston, and he does it, though he is pissed off that she did it. It's ironic since he and Swiggy bonded about losing their fathers early, and then stabbed him in the back in a cutthroat way. And he was the one who did swear on his father, which he didn't have to do. Anyways, Samantha ends up winning HOH after making a deal with Tyler, which was a smokescreen since they were already working together. She already knows who she is going to nominate, and nothing is going to budge her. Rockstar starts losing it, and Bailey tells her that she has her and that she needs to calm down. It's really nice seeing Bailey be so motivational and supportive in this conversation, where Bailey isn't like this a lot, and Rockstar is just tired of guys like Brent, quote unquote. Faisal is pissed off about being blindsided for the third week in a row, and JC tells Faisal that it was Caitlin who flipped again, and this was planned by Tyler and JC ahead of time. Caitlin wants to talk to Faisal, and he really doesn't want to talk, but they end up arguing because he trusts no one, and she's pissed off that he doesn't trust her, claiming that she never lied to him, though she did. Sam tells everyone that there will be no game talk this week, since people always freak out this time in a week, and she mentions that no one will be in her HOH room unless she lets them, and this is a way to sink your game and jury chances. Caitlin mentions that it was Tyler and JC who flipped, which Rockstar and Haley deny, while Caitlin thinks that it was Sam who used her powers to change the 2 votes, which she tells a bunch of people. Rockstar decides to use pots and pans right after Josh did it last season, and she uses it to slam it against Brent, mentioning that he has a micro penis, how they are best friends, and he is her baby daddy, while he's just enjoying all of this, since it's making her target bigger. JC talks about being 5 foot, where Bailey mentions that to be a quote-unquote little person or a dwarf, you have to be less than 5 foot. And she asks if there's a difference between a little person and a midget, and he compares it to saying the differences between the N-word with an O and an N-word with an ER, and a black person, and they both end up arguing about it. She sees that his words were a statement and hers was a question, and honestly, they both have said several offensive comments during the season and in real life, so I'm in on them both, at best. JC mentions this to the others, and they tell him to clear it up, and then Faye have to comfort Bailey about the situation, since it reminds her of being the only black girl in a white area growing up, where the two end up arguing once again, since they also mention that he also said the F word, that's a slur against gay people, in a comparison, and they're arguing about identity. Sorry, he said that, she said the F word. Honestly, they're both just arguing over who has the bigger identity politics, and after they quote-unquote seemingly make up, Samantha nominates Haley and Caitlin for eviction, slut-shaming them in her speech, saying that they need to respect themselves and they are not about female empowerment, which is just disgusting, and worsening her winner's chances even more. Caitlin and Haley are really heartbroken by this speech, and they both are crying their eyes out. Samantha continues to be combative when Caitlin tries to speak to her and apologize to her. Tyler speaks to Samantha, and she tells him that she will nominate Rockstar if the veto is used, since she is close to the nominees and caused a lot of drama, but she plans on telling the nominees after the veto ceremony that they have a chance to return to the game. Caitlin has another conversation with Samantha, but they just go back in the same circles. Honestly, I kind of forgot how male-identified Samantha is throughout the season, and it stood out to me so much rewatching this, not even just in this week, but in many moments afterwards. Samantha wants Faisal to stand up for himself, and she really likes him, so he needs to do what he needs to do in the game, and he is kissing her butt so he isn't nominated. It's disgusting that Samantha thinks that Faisal was done wrong by the 2 women somehow, though he's the one who actively put himself in that position, and we'll see this even more just now. Faisal shows his strategic dominance, catch my sarcasm, by telling both nominees to pick him for the veto, and he will save each of them if he wins. Why the fuck did he do this? It makes absolutely no sense. Caitlin corners Faisal right before the competition to make sure he'll take her off the block if he wins, or she throws it to him, though he reports to Haley that he is begging Caitlin for her. Faisal ends up winning the veto, and he has no idea what to do with the veto. Duh! Where he's tearing up about it in the diary room about the dilemma that he actively and aggressively put himself into, as both girls expect him to save them. Caitlin asks Faisal if he promised Haley to use it on her, and he isn't a good liar, so Caitlin is freaking out for him doing this, and realizing that she is not his number one. The 2 of them continue arguing, and she tells him that she is going home if she stays on the block, since Haley has done nothing. Tyler pitches for Rockstar to still go up since he tells her Faisal is going to use the veto, but Samantha tells him that she isn't going to tell anyone, including him, who is going to go up. Faisal uses the veto to save Haley, and Samantha names Rockstar as the replacement nominee, though she was about to say JC, but he tells her not to do it. I thought they weren't allowed to speak and influence people's decisions at ceremonies like this, but clearly I guess I'm wrong. Caitlyn cries about being backstabbed by Faisal, and Rockstar cries about being nominated. Caitlyn cries to Faisal because he knows that she is going home and that he knew he was going to do this, and Faisal tells her that he isn't over what she did to Swaggy since it negatively impacted his game, and he's 100% right to feel that way, but of course she's not going to take accountability for that. Samantha tells everyone about the twist, and one of the two nominees has the chance to come back in the game. Tyler is speaking to Faisal about how he wants Caitlyn to stay, and Haley hopes Faisal votes out Caitlyn with her since she's better in competitions, is untrustworthy, and will be a big target if she comes back. Caitlyn speaks to Tyler, and he mentions that she needs to convince JC to keep her and pitch that she will go after Faisal. Brett campaigns to get Rockstar out with his alliance, and JC tells them that Caitlyn is a crazy bitch, where Rockstar is easy to read and who will not win anything. Tyler and even Angela pitch for Caitlyn to stay, but JC is insistent on getting Caitlyn out of the house. We have more sappy Caitlyn and Faisal content, and he is tired of her emotions. And Rockstar speaks to her allies, but she is nervous since all the votes this season have been all over the place, where they give her advice on what to do in her campaign, as she has their votes. Rockstar has a conversation with Brett, and he realizes that Caitlyn needs to go, since Rockstar sucks socially and physically, and Caitlyn is way too much of a wild card, as she flipped on one of her best friends, where he mentions that she sent Swaggy home just because he said he didn't trust her. Sam tells Tyler that it's better for it not to be a tie, since she might not vote the way they want, and she will let the house know that. Caitlyn is evicted in a 9-1 vote, and despite getting the easiest puzzle ever so she can come back, she fails it so she's unable to return to the house. Caitlyn was entertaining, but also kind of frustrating to watch. It was annoying to see how much she victimized herself in situations, though her actions were the reasons why she was in that position, but she brought a lot of chaos, unpredictability, and fun for the first half of the season, and I think it would have been more boring had she not been there, so I appreciate her without liking her very much at the same time. Like Audrey, it was good that she didn't last too long since she would have gotten exhausting and her quote-unquote unpredictability would have just been grating and predictable after a while, so she lasted as long as she needed to. It's also kind of weird that her journey involved two men and her liking these men, but them clearly not liking her back, and seeing her break down over it was kind of sad to watch. Week 5 is back to our normally scheduled programming with the Effery, the Blindsides, the Trainwreck, and the huge downfalls of certain people. But it was very entertaining. Faisal is relieved that Caitlyn is gone, and Tyler thinks that he's being set up to be the one person that gave her a sympathy vote. Haley questions Faisal if he was a sympathy vote, and he is annoyed that she even asked him that. Tyler asks JC if he voted Rockstar out, and he lies about it, but he doesn't want Tyler to be set up for the vote. Level 6 thinks that Scotty was the one who made the move, especially since he is the one who lied about the Swaggy vote. And Bailey thinks this as well, using the same rationale. Apparently Scott admitted to Bailey that he voted Swaggy out, and she tells Samantha this. Bailey ends up winning HOH, and Angela mentions that she threw the competition, and what will become the Hive is celebrating, though all of them mentioned in many occasions that they don't trust Scotty. Brett is worried about Bailey being HOH, and Rachel mentions that she is going to throw Scotty under the bus to Bailey. Bailey and Tyler are talking, and he is crying, I don't know if he's faking it in this moment, about the Caitlyn situation, and is portraying that he is a lone wolf, where she mentions that he hasn't been loyal to her in the game, and she wants him to be on her team. We have a Faisal and JC segment on the show, and Bailey speaks to Haley about how she is only threatened by JC and Brett, but she doesn't trust Scotty. She doesn't know who she will nominate besides Brett, and she asks Scotty about if he voted to keep Caitlyn, which he denies. He blames Rachel, and Bailey tells Scotty that he does weird shit, and he doesn't like the shit that he did with Swaggy, and he makes her promise that he'll be loyal to her. Bailey speaks to JC, and she makes him promise her that they won't nominate one another. And she suggests the idea of people suggesting him as a pawn, and of course JC does not want to be a pawn at all. JC speaks to Faisal, being worried about being nominated, and he calls Faisal dumb, so he needs to convince her to not nominate him. Faisal speaks to Bailey, and she tells him that she is thinking about JC, Rachel, and Brett, and she calls Faisal out about JC only being good for him and not for her. But he mentions that JC is an asset, though Bailey is mentioning that her gut is telling her to nominate JC, and she definitely should have went with this. Bailey and Haley essentially tag team Faisal about telling her that nominating JC would be a bad move, and he is really fed up with them, but they want him to be about Hay and Bay. This tended to happen a lot whenever they would have conversations, and I remember Bailey mentioning xenophobic comments about him being Pakistani and Muslim, and Haley agreed with her, essentially, and kind of laughed it off. Bailey speaks to Rachel and tells her that Scotty blamed the vote on Rachel, who ends up pitching for Brett to stay. Bailey tells Rachel that she needs to be a pawn, and she's pissed off at Scotty, where Bailey decides to tell Rachel about having a power up to put two people on the block, no matter who the HOH is. Why the hell is she telling Rachel this? It's not like Rachel and Bailey had any sort of allegiance to one another at this point. Bailey mentions that she thinks it will bring loyalty from Rachel, but it's just really stupid. Bailey nominates Rachel and Brett for eviction. Rachel gets emotional about being on the block, and Casey is trying to calm her down. Rachel was at the bottom of her alliance for weeks now, but because of her invisible edit, we didn't see this on the show until now. Faisal brags about saving JC from being nominated, though JC isn't really grateful since he still thinks Faisal is a dumbass. Tyler speaks to Bailey, and she tells him to keep the nominations the same, and he asks if he's being backdoored, and she says no. She hopes that he isn't going to use the veto if he wins it, and mentions that he has a power, maybe Scott or JC, essentially. Tyler is deceiving her since he does plan to use the veto if he wins it at this point, and he denies having a power. JC tells Bailey about Faisal taking credit for him not being nominated, and this pisses her off since it's her HOH. No one can control her. So she literally wakes Faisal up in the middle of the night to lay into him, and she's claiming that he isn't putting her in the best spot, though I don't see how him taking credit for something would cause her to not be in the best spot, since that attention would go onto him and not her. I don't get her rationale here. Rachel speaks to Bailey about her being upset, since she feels like she's sending Brett eviction notice, and she's still trying to get Bailey to nominate someone else, though Bailey mentions that she couldn't have done anything to get Brett to not be nominated, and Rachel keeps on mentioning that Brett isn't good for her game, or him going isn't good for her game, despite him treating her like crap the entire season. But it's annoying Bailey, since it's clear that Rachel doesn't trust her, isn't going to trust or work with her, and mentions that Rachel brought her negativity to her, and she, Bailey, is trying not to stop, which, the way she speaks to people this week is just really horrible, and really shows that she doesn't know how to handle power well at all, and it's turning a lot of people off from her. Tyler wins the veto, and he talks to Bailey about who the replacement nominee would be, and she mentions that if a power up is used, Angela would go up. He throws Scotty under the bus by mentioning that Scotty is his best friend, so he's essentially pulling a reverse psychology trick on her. So if she is mad at him for using the veto, she will nominate Scotty as the replacement nominee. Bailey pitches a girl's thing to Rachel, and Rachel mentions that she has her back, as Bailey mentions that Tyler would only use the veto if Angela goes up. He did not say this, but Bailey is twisting this conversation, which will be very important for next week. Rachel mentions this to Angela, and Rachel is pissed off during the conversation, but it makes no sense to Angela. Angela repeats this to Casey, and it doesn't make sense to her either, and Casey repeats this to Tyler. Angela and Tyler speak, and they think that Rachel is lying instead of Bailey lying, but it makes them want her to go home. But they always wanted Rachel to go home first if their alliance was to take a hit. So this doesn't really change anything. Rachel ends up telling Angela about Bailey's power, and Angela tells all of this to Tyler, which will also be important for next week. Tyler does not use the veto. Tyler has plans to blindside Bailey and her side this week, since Queen Bey isn't going to get her way all week, though Bailey consistently mentions that her HOH is the best one in the season. Brett is sure that he's staying since Rachel is rubbing people the wrong way, her paranoia isn't doing her much favors with anyone, and Rachel is crying about not wanting Brett to go home. Angela and the Level 6 Alliance are getting annoyed with Rachel's behavior, while Bailey is hoping to work with Tyler in the future. He doesn't trust her and wants to send her out next. Casey, Angela, and Tyler agree that they need to send Rachel home since she is a liability, but she will freak out if told beforehand, so they're going to pull Winston on her. Brett thinks that he's going home at this point, and mentions that there will be 4 guys after his departure if he leaves. So it seemed like Brett thought at one point that he was staying, and then at another point in the week he thought he was going home. But I guess that's just emotions when you're on the block. Tyler essentially tells Samantha that he is voting out Rachel, so she is going to vote out Rachel as well. Tyler tells Brett about all the information about the Power app, and then we have this weird segment about Faisal being jealous that Haley and Brett are hanging out. Haley denies to Brett about her and Faisal being a thing, and Rockstar is trying to mediate things with Faisal. Faisal keeps on walking around and seeing them speak 4 hours later, so he's worried about where she is voting. Angela and Brett come up with a speech to call out Bailey's app and throws Rachel under the bus, which he does in his eviction speech. Rachel is evicted in a 5-4 vote and is blindsided out of the house. Rachel definitely had the worst edit in the season, as she was essentially invisible up until her eviction week, and we really don't see much of her game. But I do think that her paranoia just rubbed her alliance the wrong way, and she was way too loyal to a group of people when she was at the bottom of her alliance, when she could have spent more time building bonds with everyone in the house. She's a very nice woman, but I don't think she offered much to the season, and I don't think that would have changed even if she had stayed, as she's mainly known for how she reacted to her eviction more than anything else. There really isn't much else to say, so I'm just going to leave it at that pertaining to Rachel. I think week 6 was the week where the season started to overall kind of peak, as there was a whole lot of drama, a whole lot of betrayal. The sides were still pretty even, and there's still kind of a back and forth, and this would arguably be the last week where that still kind of exists. Though you can tell the ramifications of this week really had an effect on Bailey and Tyler in more ways than one, not only just in this season, but in All Stars as well. Bailey is pissed off that her HOH didn't go her way, and she snaps at Brett for his eviction speech and him making her an enemy, where she snaps over him calling her honey, and he doesn't care about her being mad since she was the one who nominated him. Rockstar is sad about losing the HOH competition to Angela, the other Angela, since she's Angela as well, her real name, and Bailey is wondering if she should use her app now or later. Faisal is confused about the vote another time, and JC blames it on Scotty or Rockstar. I don't know why he can never see that JC was the one who never voted with them. It's very obvious. Bailey pretty much attacks Rockstar as she's accusing her of voting Rachel out, and Rockstar is defending herself since she has no idea what is happening. And we all know that, or if you don't know, Bailey and Rockstar had a fallout about a year or two after the season, and seeing this dynamic in this fight kind of foreshadows what would happen to their friendship in real life, as Bailey never really cared much for her like that, and she always wanted her below her, and would lash out at Rockstar when things didn't go her way. Tyler is elated that his plan worked and is reveling in the others stressing about it. He told Bailey 15 minutes before the eviction that he has to vote out Rachel so he could cover his tracks, and this is what confuses me about Tyler overall. He revels in making these cutthroat, villainous, dirty moves, but then loses his mind when people meaning the other Haskins and the fans, perceive him to be shady, which we also see in his next season and his future commentary about Big Brother in general, so that kind of annoys me about him in general. The hacker competition is introduced, and Sam hosts a meeting where she tells everyone to refuse to compete in it, and that they should give it to Sam, where she won't use it. Rockstar and a bunch of others call her out for the stupid plan, and they mention that they don't trust people in the house enough to do that. Level 4 make fun of the other side, and Angela mentions that she will nominate Rockstar and Scotty, though Tyler tells her that she should send Bailey home. They didn't show this in the edits, but Angela actually did want to send Scotty home, but Tyler was the one who had to convince her to send Bailey home, and Angela and Bailey for the most part had a good enough relationship up until this point. Angela mentions that Bailey getting nominated by the hacker would be good, since it would be bloodless. Angela speaks to Bailey, where the latter tells her that she can only use her app before the nominations, and they trash Rachel, thankful that she is gone. What they don't show is Angela gaslighting Bailey about wanting her to be the first African American winner, and saying this after Angela already planned on sending Bailey home this week, which is just unnecessary, and this is also something that Tyler would do to Bailey in All Stars. Angela nominates Scotty and Rockstar for eviction. Haley ends up winning the hacker competition, and of course we have the typical speculation of who has it. Tyler is secretly nominated, and Scotty is taken off the block by Haley as the hacker, since she notices that Tyler is playing the middle too much and no one will target him, which is good intuition on her part, at least for this. Bailey and Rockstar think that it is Scotty who is the hacker, and Haley keeps it quiet, since she isn't safe despite being the hacker. Tyler and JC speculate that Bailey is the hacker since Tyler told her last week that Scotty is her best friend, and JC reports to Casey and Angela that it is Bailey, though they intend on playing nice with her. Angela and Casey create a story to get Bailey to want to keep the nominations the same, just so she can feel safe. Scotty tries to make a deal with Tyler, where he will take him off the block, but Tyler doesn't trust him, and it doesn't even matter, since Angela keeps the veto, despite getting 5th out of 6th, since she begs Tyler and Scotty to let her keep the veto. It's the prizes veto, essentially, where everyone plays, and if you're out the first round, you're 6th, and the more you last in the competition, the more options you have where you can take the others' punishments, but they just didn't take it from Angela. Bailey throws Scotty under the bus and tells Angela and Casey that she could take Rockstar off the block to make that happen. Angela takes Tyler off the block and nominates Bailey as the replacement nominee, claiming that she's the hacker. Angela is trying to be a badass in her speech, but then has the nerve to run in her HOH room to lock the door and hide for 3 days with her lame ass. And she would do this more than once, and that's another element that really annoys me about Angela and makes her really unlikable. Tyler decides to put on his sunglasses and is kind of rubbing it in Bailey's face as she asks him about what he did to her, or what she did to him, just to get clarification. And he gaslights her about being the hacker and mentions that she could have put him up last week, though he mentions that no, she couldn't because he won the veto, though she clearly could have put him up during the actual nominations. She doesn't understand where all this is coming from, and he says it in front of everyone that he's voting her out. Tyler really mismanages her here, and it's one of the reasons why he ends up losing the game. Though there's another conversation that they don't show on the edit where I don't know if he said good morning or something like that, and she thought he was saying it in a condescending manner, which rubbed her the wrong way even more. Haley feels really guilty, and Bailey mentions that she intentionally did not use it because she wanted to support Angela. Bailey continues to talk about the hacker with Haley, who is struggling with whether she should compromise who she is to win the game or reveal it and sign her own death warrant next week. Haley confesses to Bailey about being the hacker, and she did not intentionally hurt or ruin her game, and Bailey is pissed off, not at Haley, but the others, and they then have a cry fest together. Haley hosts a house meeting and owns that she was the hacker, so the house needs to apologize to Bailey for framing her, and mentions that Tyler wanted Angela to be backdoored last week. Rachel mentioned this to Angela last week, but it was twisted, which I discussed then. Tyler denies this, and Bailey is insistent, though the flashbacks show otherwise, and she yells at him for never throwing him under the bus, and him throwing her under the bus and treating her like trash for framing her, instead of just apologizing. He still mentions that he's not going to apologize to her, and mentions that Haley was the one who did this, and Bailey ends up bleeding from her mouth and rants about getting the power because she was by herself after Swaggy left, and she mentions that she wanted him to do well, and he can't even apologize. It's very sad watching this, knowing that she found out that she was pregnant this day, apparently, and she was an emotional roller coaster. After that confrontation and Bailey slamming the door, Tyler rants about not being a villain and starts crying. At the time, I thought he was faking this, since he did fake cry in prior weeks, but how he acted in All Stars 2 and his comments about the show and mental health, I do think that this argument did something to him. But they also didn't show Bailey and Casey arguing as well. And then there was the commentary of Bailey revealing her pregnancy after the season, and somehow this was seen as Tyler being blamed for her having a miscarriage due to the stress that her eviction week caused her, apparently. Anyways, Bailey is evicted in a 6-1 vote. Bailey is the frustrating one since she comes off as extremely spoiled and entitled throughout a lot of the season, though there were definitely moments where she was being gaslit throughout the season. She was doing well at first, where she had relationships with both sides of the house, though she kind of was lumped into the high Fate side due to her romantic relationship with Swaggy, even though she wasn't in it. And things were going well for her, where she was the last on the target list. But then she won HOH and had some of the worst HOH-itis I've ever seen in Big Brother history, and really just talking to anyone any type of way and thinking that they're going to put up with it, while revealing too much. I think Bailey's main issue is that she's too trusting of the relationships that she has and with what she knows, so she tells people things and is shocked when they backstab her or when they have different opinions of her. In general, I just think she's very ignorant, and while she is entertaining, she is not very likable whatsoever, and it's hard to get behind her. So, in my opinion, week 7 is the last interesting week of the season. And even this week could have been a lot better if it wasn't for the hacker twist, where it caused Haley's HOH to be completely overthrown despite her doing everything right. And if the hacker twist didn't happen, Casey or Angela would have went home. I think it would have been Angela who would have went home, and the season would have been a lot more interesting, and Rockstar, who had a stronger personality, would have made things a bit more fun, and the back and forth could have been stronger with her presence in the house after this week. But this was really the last week that had a whole lot of drama, and the drama wasn't tired as hell. So this week's kind of the swan song of the season, and we're only like in the middle of the season. I never really got why people said that things got boring after week 8 or after week 9, where Scotty returned after that week, but no, it was week 7 where the season had its last good week. So Haley ends up winning HOH, and Tyler is freaked out, especially since she nominated him a week ago. Faisal starts bawling his eyes out for voting out Bailey, one of the few times he voted correctly, to pouncing on Haley for winning the HOH. They are still somewhat worried because the hacker twist can ruin everything. Samantha is uncomfortable with being in the game and apologizes to Rockstar for giving Bailey a sympathy vote, as she states that Bailey was one of the few people she felt comfortable with in the house, and this is the start of Samantha's deterioration with the game. And it becomes even more clear because she and Tyler don't spend much time together from this point onward, and she's really alone. Tyler and Casey are complaining about Samantha not voting their way, though I don't know why they care because it was a near unanimous vote, and he's pretty much done with Samantha, and I think this is where he mismanages another jury vote. Haley plots with Rockstar to nominate Angela, with either Samantha or Casey being the other nomination, with the hopes to backdoor Tyler. Casey talks to Angela about Samantha being manipulative with her emotions and is annoyed seeing her cuddle with Faisal. And Tyler also told her about his power hours before the eviction to get her to vote out Bailey, so he had an inkling that she wasn't going to vote out Bailey. And Level 6 are planning on pushing Samantha. I think the flaw with people like Casey, Angela, and even somewhat Tyler at the second half of the season, but Casey and Angela in general, is that they don't know how to deal with more emotional players, and Big Brother aren't going to cast a bunch of gamebot and emotionless people, so that is a flaw with the gameplay in my opinion. Brett flirts with Haley with the hopes to get Samantha nominated, and Angela also makes the same push. Samantha knows that the others are making fun of her, and she asks who is talking about her, and Haley throws Angela under the bus, and she knows that these people are not her friends, and Samantha goes on a huge rant about it, and it's really just sad watching her at this point in the season. And in addition to being sequestered due to the nature of the game, she really starts to lose it from here on out. Faisal pretty much asks Haley to be his girlfriend, and she's hoping that they will lay low. Shockingly, they lasted a few years after the season, before he cheated on her on the challenge, and they give Samantha a creepy edit. Tyler makes his pitch to Haley and mentions that he could be nominated as a veto nominee, and he can protect himself from being nominated even during the veto ceremony, and he's pushing for himself to be backdoored. Haley nominates Angela and Casey for eviction, and they are shocked because they claim that they were not targeting her, though Haley doesn't owe either one of them anything. Everyone talks about the hacker competition, and Brett speaks to Haley, where he BS's her about what he will do with the hacker twist if he wins. Casey ends up winning the hacker competition and tells Angela and Tyler about winning the hacker competition, but tells them not to tell JC or Samantha. Rockstar is nominated by the hacker twist through Casey, who also takes herself off the block. Rockstar is really mad about being nominated and is making it known throughout the entire house, as she speculates with Faisal and Haley about who is the hacker, and Rockstar thinks that it is Casey, and she's correct on this read. Haley is worried about her plan to backdoor Tyler failing, but Angela and Casey going home isn't bad. Sam has a feeling that her relationship with Tyler is declining and he isn't genuine, which is a correct read on her part. But she mentions it to him since something in her gut is telling her about him, and her gut is correct. Haley tells Tyler that she is not backdooring him, but of course he's not believing her, and he has every right to not believe her. Rockstar notices that Casey is off, so she calls her out about it, since there are 6 other people that could be nominated, and Casey's like, "Are you talking to me?" They go back and forth, since Rockstar claims that she never said that she was the hacker, and Casey is heavily denying it, where they are cursing at one another and both mentioning that they are both grown-ass women, and Rockstar mentions that it's a bitch move. But clearly Rockstar was nominated because she had the least chance of winning the veto, so it's a smart move on Casey's part. Rockstar ends up giving Tyler an answer to the competition. What a fucking dumbass. Where he would have been booted from that round and she would have made it through the week, since everyone from his alliance was out of the competition at that point. Anyways, Tyler ends up winning the veto after Rockstar gets the last question wrong. Another fucking dumbass yell from me, even though she beat him to the podium. Haley and Fessel are expecting Tyler to veto Angela, and they're struggling with coming up with who would be the replacement nominee. Tyler vetoes Angela off the block, and Haley names Casey the replacement nominee, so Casey ends up back on the block for a second time. Samantha tells Rockstar that she thinks that she has the votes to stay, but Rockstar isn't so sure. Rockstar cuts into Tyler and Casey's conversation, and she mentions that she is sorry that she's on the block, where she's ranting about how entitled Angela is, and mentions that she doesn't want Casey to go home, though Casey is befuddled with Rockstar's antics, as Rockstar is pretty much telling Casey that she's going home, and Casey ends up reporting all this to Angela. Tyler is talking about wanting to keep all of his final twos for as long as he can, which makes sense for him, and does some damage control with Samantha. Faisal's big ass breaks the sink in the HOH room, which he sits on, which was very funny to watch, and they decide to show Haley and Faisal kiss in the HOH room. Rockstar decides to kill her ego and makes her pitch to Brett, where they decide to, quote-unquote, work together, where she mentions that Casey is too unadaptable, but clearly Brett isn't buying this, and is eating all this up, since he just wants to stick the knife into Rockstar a bit more. Rockstar, Haley, and Faisal are talking themselves up about Rockstar being safe, but it is all for naught. Rockstar is evicted in a 5-1 vote. Rockstar is definitely a unique house guest, and I don't think there's been anyone who is like her before this season or after this season, as she's a very liberal woman, and while she is a mother, she's very free-spirited and she has a youthful spirit. When it comes to the game, she definitely wasn't good, as she only had a social game with a few people in the house, and the other side of the house didn't like her and she didn't like them, while making it very known. While she had some decent reads at points, there was a lot of times where she just speculated about everything and talked herself into circles and riddles, but she was one of the few people who was keeping her side of the house together, so I do give her props for that. But with that in mind, I don't think she had the qualities of being a leader. It really pissed me off that she went home due to a twist on her closest allies, HOH, and I do think she would have lasted a bit longer without this, since I think the likes of Scotty and Fessel and even potentially Haley would have been targeted over her. I did appreciate her for the drama that she got while in the house, and I do think that her presence kind of added a lot more to the season, especially with a lot of the people in the house who had smaller personalities than she did. But Rockstar did herself no favors. It did kind of suck seeing how her allies treated her at various points in the season, and while a lot of people act like she was bullying Brett, he actually made a lot of horrible comments about her, so she had every right to dislike him, and feeling like he's a spoiled, privileged person. Overall, I found her likable enough. So the season officially dies around week 8, or it heavily declines, and usually a week where someone makes such a boneheaded move can lead to entertaining results. That doesn't even happen here, since after the boneheaded move is made, everything's just completely dull and miserable for the rest of the week. Faisal ends up winning HOH, and Brett thinks that he masterminded Rockstar's eviction, which isn't true, though he was the rogue vote. Faisal wants to get to the bottom of who was the rogue vote. Who effing cares? Brett thinks he will be targeted because he is in competition with Haley as the only stud, which, whatever, and JC feels like this will be his HOH. Scotty tells Haley that he was the only one who voted to keep Rockstar, though the Level 6 Alliance comes up with a plan to make it look like Brett was the one who voted to keep Rockstar. Faisal tells Haley that he doesn't trust Scotty, and he is threatened by one of the guys. And he is worried about Scotty taking Tyler off the block if he wins the veto. So now it seems like it will be Brett and Tyler who was nominated. And the fact that he says that he isn't threatened by the woman could easily be seen as sexist. And I know a lot of people did see it as sexist at the time that this happened. JC lies about why he voted Rockstar out, though he told him earlier that they didn't have the vote, while pushing the lie that Sam told him that Scotty voted Rockstar out. And why would Scotty tell Sam this? So they're all in Faisal's HOH room, and he asks them who was the person who voted Rockstar out, where Scotty raises his hand immediately, where Brett takes forever to raise his hand, which should have been a sign as to who was telling the truth and who wouldn't, but Fessy's mind just isn't like that. Brett mentions the Swaggy C shirt stuff, and the fact that he even got to Brett is a really bad sign for Scotty. And he calls Casey an actor. Scotty calls Casey an actor, where she snaps about not being close to Brett, which is cringe as hell, and if they realized who voted with who, they should have known who was close and who wasn't close. JC mentions that Scotty likes Haley as more of a friend and is threatened by Faisal, so he wants him out. They also don't show the infamous bathtub pitch, where Haley ends up ranting about how Scotty needs to go, and of course JC pitches his case to Faisal about Scotty being an emotional player. Faisal is mad that Haley wants to comfort him, and that she needs to do that after nominations, and he rants because Scotty has been shady the entire season, and Haley shouldn't be comforting him. So it's time to talk about Haley's edit. So her edit is something that was a sore point in the season, especially at this point, as they made her look like the only competent person in the alliance, when she was just as bad as the others. And I think they did this due to the demographic that she represents. The young, cute, white woman who is in this alliance with all of these either people of color, an older person in Rockstar, or someone who wasn't seen as attractive in Scotty, though she made just as many mistakes as all of them did. But because they wanted a rooting point and an underdog, they really focused on Haley being the all-knowing one at this point. Scotty mentions the plans of Love 6 trying to frame him, and they used her to get out someone in their alliance out last week, and then they're trying to use Faisal to get him out, which is a good point. Scotty essentially has to be told to speak to Faisal, where he says Brett and Casey are working together, where Faisal mentions that he has never even seen Brett speak to Casey, but is questioning why Brett is still in the house. I'm going to ignore more of the Haley and Faisal conversations since it's just a circle jerk and it isn't even the most accurate. But she pointed out that no one in the house speaks game to him and he has answer to it, but it shows a fault in Faisal's game where he isn't speaking game to most of the house, or even pretending to speak game to most of the house, which causes him to be isolated and for him to not know what's really going on. Faisal nominates Scotty and Brett for eviction. Faisal tells Scotty that they don't talk extensive game to one another, and this is a problem since they're in an alliance together and they've been in an alliance together for the entire season, but it shows a fault in both of their games. And Faisal is trying to justify himself in front of the house, where Scotty is just bewildered, and the entire house is making fun of how idiotic Faisal is. And they're absolutely right in doing that. Haley and Faisal argue once again, where they're in the bedroom, and he's annoyed that she thinks he made the wrong move, and he mentions how she talks for hours with Scotty and Brett, so she could have something else going on. And this is such a red flag, not even on a game point of view, just in a relationship point of view. Faisal proposes an alliance with himself, Haley, Angela, and Tyler, since they are all physical competitors and the rest of the house are floaters, where Tyler shades him for talking game and making alliances on day 60. And that's true, when you're conveniently making up this pitch for an alliance where you don't even have much of a personal relationship, much less a game relationship with them beforehand, that's a problem. So Brett ends up winning the veto, and Scotty is annoyed that he was second in another competition this week. I forgot he was second in the HOH competition, and had he won, the season would have been more interesting, and this week would have been in a good direction. But that's beside the point at this point. Sam still doesn't believe that Haley was the hacker, and she was, and she tells Scotty that the only person that he'll survive the block against is Haley, and he starts to realize that as well. Samantha mentions that Bailey and Rockstar went home due to Haley, and Faisal will be next, but I think this is just Samantha just ranting about how much she dislikes Haley. Samantha decides to make a pitch to Faisal to get Haley up, and Brett tells her outright that this won't work since he was in that conversation as well. Faisal thinks that Samantha is batshit crazy, and he is right, but Scotty even throws Haley under the bus, and she is Caitlyn 2.0, or that's his argument. Faisal tells Haley that Scotty is pitching for her to go on the block, and how he called her Caitlyn 2.0, with pitting two guys against one another. Casey, Angela, and Tyler talk about how Samantha needs to be nominated, and Haley walks into the room to cry to them about it. Haley decides to speak to Scotty, who tells her to disassociate herself from him, where he tells her that about what he told Faisal, since it's best for her game that he goes. Scotty speaks to Faisal about how he doesn't want Haley to be nominated, where he tells Faisal that he has feelings for Haley. Why would he do this? And Samantha should go up beside him. Brett takes himself off the block, and Faisal nominates Casey as the replacement nominee. Casey feels extremely safe, and she talks with Faisal about how Scotty knows it's a done deal. Brett talks to Angela and Tyler about how this week is a done deal, and it will probably be a unanimous vote, where Brett makes fun of Faisal for destroying his own alliance, and how the other side had chance after chance to deplete the level 6, which is correct. The oven turns into a fire for a few seconds, and Tangela talks to Faley about their supposed Final Four, though of course Tyler and Angela are bullshitting them. Then they are by themselves. They talk about how it's not in their best interest to win the next competition, and how Samantha will probably be the next target, and how it would benefit them if their allies win HOH. JC talks to Tyler about their final two from day 2, if I remember correctly. Nothing's really happening in the house, as we have a bunch of scenes about Tyler solidifying all of his final twos together, with his final four being Angela, Casey, and JC, which does end up happening. And his ideal final two is with Casey, which happens since he thinks he can beat her. Scotty is evicted in a unanimous 6-0 vote, and I believe this is the first unanimous vote of the season. Scotty is an interesting one. It's clear that he was cast to be the token nerd of the season, but he had a lot more confidence than most of the nerds, and he didn't seem as socially awkward, and he was kind of, I don't want to say hip or gangster, which isn't the word, but there's a certain, maybe, I don't know if swagger's the word, but it's the closest synonym that I could come up with that he had that makes him different from the other nerds that they've cast. I did enjoy his HOH and how he was insistent on nominating the bros, and he knew the moves that needed to be made, but he was definitely very sloppy with the Swaggy C vote and how he just came off as way too untrustworthy to everyone around him, and he was at the bottom of his alliance from the very beginning to the very end. Though I definitely do think there are some social cues that he definitely missed out on. But there was a chaotic sense to him that I did appreciate in the season. But as a player, he was just all over the place, and I could definitely see why people distrusted him throughout the season. I don't have much to say about Week 9, except for the fact that Fessy and Haley's arguing got really annoying, and the gas was running very low in the engine. Angela ends up winning HOH, despite her and Tyler wanting one of Brett or Casey to win it. Haley and Faisal feel safe due to their new deal, and he thinks that she will go after Samantha. Haley walks into Brett, Casey, and Tangela celebrating, and she mentions it to Faisal, where she is sure that she will go up, but Faisal still believes in their Final Four deal. Level 6 speak about how Faisal and Haley need to go up together, since it guarantees one of them going, but Angela mentions that Sam would be the easiest move. Haley offers herself up as a pawn against Samantha to try and build good faith with Angela, and Angela makes fun of her in the diary room about it. Faisal tries speaking to Angela in Haley's defense about not pawning her, but Angela really isn't buying any of it, and he pitches the same thing to Tyler, where Haley is starting to get annoyed with Faisal since he told her to stop talking in the conversation with Tyler. Haley and Faisal continue arguing about it when it's just the two of them, and it really shows the toxicity in their relationship, where she mentions that they don't owe her anything, and by they, she means Tyler and Angela. We're getting to see the start of Angela and Tyler's romance, and he promises that he isn't going to throw his game away for a romance, which kind of does happen pertaining to his relationship with the other house guests. Angela is annoyed that she and Tyler keep on having to get blood on their hands, and JC pitches for Fessel and Haley to be on the block, since he could take Haley off the block, and he is also fine with booting Fessel, since he was just using him to be a spy the entire time. Fessel speaks to Angela, and she mentions that it will look off to the others if Haley is off the block, as well as him. Angela nominates Fessel and Haley for eviction. Fessel is blindsided by the nominations, and she immediately realizes that he fucked up his HOH, and Fessel comes to this realization as well. Fessel apologizes to her, and she says that he isn't the target, though he knows that he is the target, which is accurate on his part. Samantha apologizes to them and doesn't like that Fessel is nominated. Take note that she says nothing about Haley being nominated, which just shows another element of Samantha being male-identified. The threesome make fun of Fessel and Haley and make it known that Fessel needs to go this week. Fessel and Haley make fun of themselves for their HOHs and how they played since the jury faces started, where it is a funny moment seeing from the two of them. As they go back to Haley screwing up the hacker, causing Bailey to go home, Haley having the hacker twist get Rockstar out, and then Fessel using his HOH to boot Scotty. Haley speaks to Angela, who tells her that her chances of staying against Fessel is very high, but that diminishes if she's nominated against Sam. Fessel asks JC if he will veto him, but he doesn't give him an answer, which pisses Fessel off since he tells JC that he will be booted after him, which isn't accurate. Casey wins the veto over Fessel by 1 point, and he knows that it's game over for him. Haley is attempting to integrate with the other house guests since she will be in the house next week, knowing that none of them really want her there. Fessel is annoyed that she isn't spending most of her time with him, and they argue again as he is doing laundry, and after he leaves, Brett ends up consoling her, though she denies that she is in a romance with Fessel, though everyone already knows that they are. Casey, of course, does not use the veto. We have more bickering between Fessel and Haley, and they talk about how they don't know how their relationship will be outside of the house, but it turns into them mourning about their game together. Brett talks to Tyler about being on the outside of their alliance, which is his fault, and he throws JC under the bus about them having many final twos. JC having many final twos, which I don't even think is accurate, to be honest. Brett makes a final two with Tyler, while knowing that he's at the bottom of his alliance, which is correct. Tyler mentions that he will cut Angela if he has to, but I doubt that. JC is trying to set himself up for the future, mentioning that Casey and Angela need to be targeted since they are a duo. Tyler still wants to target Haley, and he shuts down any attempts to get Casey and Angela targeted, which should have been a sign for JC. JC reports this plan back to Brett, where he is hoping to make Brett his new Fessel, who spends the entire week isolating himself in his room, hence there being no footage of him campaigning whatsoever, and Fessel kind of just sulks his way through the week. Fessel is evicted in a 4-1 vote. I definitely do see some red flags with Fessel, but at the same time, he was a huge himbo throughout the season, and it was funny watching him doe-eye trying to figure out everything that was happening throughout the season. I guess his stupidity and kind of randomness made things a bit more exciting throughout the season, and he wasn't unlikable, though he wasn't the most likable person at all. I think in general, he's kind of just a quiet, kind of interpersonal person who sticks with his people and doesn't really cause much drama. But obviously, watching him now, after seeing how he has become on the challenge, is kind of, I don't want to say sad, but kind of shows the desperation he had to becoming his own person in the reality TV world. I can't say Fessel's a dad, though I would be lying if I said he was very entertaining overall. I will say that it sucks that it took 20 seasons and 19 years for there to be a person of South Asian descent to be on Big Brother USA, and he was the first. I know I've been complaining about the last 2 weeks up to this point, but whatever sort of intrigue or interest that was somewhat present in this last 2 weeks is completely gone in week 10, especially with the jury returnee twist where it's Scotty who doesn't have the potential to do much of anything, and it's even worse because it's used to send him right back out of the house. And everything is just at a snail's pace at this point. Scotty returns to the house, and the house is pretending to be happy that he is back. Scotty was told by Fessel that JC was manipulating him, so he wants JC out at this point. JC is really annoyed as he can barely pretend to smile around Scotty, and it's clear Haley is very happy. Tyler ends up winning the HOH competition, and Haley is annoyed that Samantha was blatantly cheering against her, and she doesn't understand why Samantha doesn't like her. JC is definitely playing this up for his own benefit, and is heavily pushing for Scotty to go once again. Tangela talks about who is the bigger threat between Haley and Scotty, and we get more Tangela focused on the edit, which I honestly just don't give an F about. Casey talks about her coming out story, which is actually very nice to hear. But the story is, when she was in high school, she came out to her father, and he said that he already knew it, but she didn't come out to her mother until a few years ago, where she is 30 when this season was filmed, where her mother was in denial, and she even talks about this later on in the season, and it kind of just gives some insights to Casey. Haley knows that she is going up, and is speaking to Tyler about her journey during the jury portion of the season. Scotty wants to work with Tyler, and he is told about Haley forming a final two with Tangela during the week that he was sent home, where he tells Scotty that he wants Haley to go. JC and Brett talk about how they are all at the bottom of their alliance, and doesn't like Tyler and Angela hooking up, but Brett reports all of this to Tyler, since Brett is under the impression that he and Tyler still have a final two. And here's the issue that I think Brett has with his game, with him being very male-centric. I think due to him seeing Tyler as the other straight, white, muscular male, he thought that they had this immediate bond that would cause them to be the final two, where he could have been forming final twos with someone like a JC, a KC, or an Angela, or even building his own connections, but he just continuously went back to his brocentric ways, especially after Winston was already gone, instead of truly adapting. Tyler speaks to JC, where he mentions that Haley needs to go first, but JC shuts it down and also mentions that Brett is after him. Tyler nominates Haley and Scotty for eviction. I forgot to mention, because it wasn't in the episodes, that Tyler was told by Scotty what the jury thinks, and they mentioned that they think that he is kind of just hiding under the shadows, and that the jury really dislikes Angela. So Tyler had that in his back pocket, but he unfortunately doesn't use it to his advantage. Haley talks to Scotty about how Tyler, Angela, and Casey and Brett were celebrating together last week, and she speaks to Tyler to ask if she's the target, where he mentions that he doesn't decide that, since he doesn't vote, but people already voted Scotty out, but she notices that he isn't giving her a direct answer. JC is speaking to Tyler, and it's an awkward conversation, since Tyler is really starting to see how JC is playing the game, and how self-interested he is. We have a segment of Tyler getting his hair straightened, and I'm sure this happened a few weeks before they showed it on the episode, if I remember correctly. We see Tyler and Angela hanging out a lot, and they're consistently getting cock-blocked, but we do see them making out in their bed. People are really tired of Samantha at this point, and her being an emotional disaster, where people want her gone sooner than later because she's just so irritating, and if I remember correctly, she was threatening to quit and leave sequester several times up to this point in the season. Haley throws Fessel under the bus, and she blames all of her moves on him to Casey, and they're both trying to build a relationship with one another. Casey wins the veto, and she obviously has no reason to use it. We have more awkward conversations with Tyler and Haley about him not telling her if she's the target or not, and she then speaks to Scotty, and they agree how the other group aren't taking into mind about caring about story votes, since the Hive controls who wins this season, and I do think it's a huge flaw for many of them. Scotty tells her that he was told that he is a pawn, and this causes her to cry in Casey's arms, where she tells Haley that she is safe. Casey does not use the veto. Haley speaks to Tyler about Scotty telling her that he is the pawn, and Scotty kind of just skirts around the topic when Tyler speaks to him about it. JC throws Brett under the bus about wanting Angela out, though it's really JC, and this is starting to annoy Tyler, since he wants them and Casey to be his final four, and I don't even know why JC is throwing Brett under the bus, but they're both very guilty of doing this, so I can't be too annoyed. Angela speaks to Tyler about taking a shot at JC, and this is really pissing him off, since all of his allies want to go after one another, and he's struggling with the fact that Angela has to go. Though, she doesn't have to go, and she shouldn't go for his game, but Tyler never even considers that. Scotty tells Brett that Angela is using him as a shield, and Rockstar hates him. But she hates Angela even more, as Angela apparently gave Rockstar a very bad goodbye message, which stupid move for her jury chances. JC and Brett talk about how it's obvious Angela is with Tyler and how she needs to go, and how Samantha and Haley need to stay, so they can go after one another, though the two are hoping that the other can take the shot. Scotty is evicted in a unanimous 5-0 vote. And he mentions in his exit interviews that he, as well as the other jurors, see Tyler as a coward who goes with what the House does. There's really not much to talk about with Scotty in this iteration. Since he was only there for a week, he was consistently outcasted, and while he did tell people what the jury thought of him, he kind of just tried to kiss up to Tyler, but that didn't even work for him since he was still on the block and the entire house wanted him gone. He definitely came off as very bitter, as he apparently made a very nasty speech to Angela during his eviction, and I don't really have much else to say since Scotty really was just in and put out. Though I have less faith in him as a player just from seeing this, and he'll probably be lower when I rank the cast since he came back and was evicted in a week, and he was even lucky to have the opportunity to come back anyways. Week 11 was another dead week in my opinion, because everything was just so stagnant and predictable, and a lot of the remaining house guests just aren't interesting whatsoever. And I think that's why the first half was so much better, because they focused on the people who were more interesting and had bigger personalities, and when a lot of them went home, the people who weren't given much of an edit had to be focused on here, and they just don't have it. Anyways, Casey wins HOH, and Haley knows that she will be on the block for the third consecutive week. Samantha feels extremely alone in the house, and Casey is planning on putting Samantha and Haley on the block to get rid of the other side once and for all. Casey has to come up with a way to tell Samantha that she'll be a pawn in a comforting way, and Brett tells Samantha beforehand that the entire house wants Haley gone. So Brett already gives her a hint. Casey has the conversation with Samantha, who thinks that Haley is trying to provoke her. Haley speaks to Casey about how much she has her, but Casey doesn't believe it, since Haley put her on the block twice, which is fair, to be honest. Nicole and Victor enter the house, and he proposes to her, which she of course accepts. Derek, Paul, Josh, Danielle, and Brittany appear, and all the BB20 Huskies are watching this in the room above. Though they spend a lot of time on this engagement, and the 20 house guests, or the BB20 house guests, are able to mingle afterwards. Angela tells Tyler about how she was put into gymnastics when she was 5, and how she spent most of her childhood training, so she had no childhood in life, and she didn't really like doing it, and how she kind of resents her mother, and it caused a lot of stress with her family and distance between her and her brother, so she is relatively emotionless. It's shocking seeing Angela so emotional and open, and then she delves into how she quit when she was 17, and then she started doing track. With this depth and insight, it does explain how Angela acts a lot in the house and how she handles certain situations just in life and from what we see in social media. So I understand Angela a lot more here, and I empathize with her more than I did throughout most of the season. So Casey nominates Samantha and Haley for eviction. Samantha is trying her best to keep it calm, and the Huskies get video recordings of their families. We have a segment of Brett and JC getting close over the last few weeks, though neither one of them prioritize one another as allies, though they should have, and it's clear that JC is trying to make Brett his new vessel. JC is planting seeds to Tyler to have Brett as the replacement nominee, and mentions that Casey and Angela need to go on the block, which is just annoying Tyler even more, and makes him want to target JC very soon. Casey wins the power of veto, and this is her third veto win in a row, and of course she is not going to use the veto. Casey and Tyler talk about JC and Brett, but none of this really matters, as Casey decides to not use the veto. Haley knows that she is a gunner, and they are talking about the double, where Angela offers herself up as a pawn, where Brett realizes that she is really safe and she's in a prime position. He realizes that he is going to need to make a move soon, and he talks to Tyler about how the jury is better at them, but not JC and Samantha. He mentions that whomever sends Angela to the jury will make them very happy. Tyler reports this to Casey, and he twists the conversation, mentioning that Brett says that it's easier to beat Samantha and JC rather than Casey and Angela, so now Casey wants to target Brett. Tyler admits that Casey is his number one, and he doesn't think that he will beat Brett, so he needs to go before JC and Samantha. Haley is evicted in a unanimous 4-0 vote. Haley is definitely likable for the most part, though she definitely had her annoying moments, like all of her interactions with Faisal and how incredibly passive she was throughout the season, when if she took more action, she could have put herself in a very good position. We didn't see a whole lot of her until the second half of the season, where she definitely did have some decent reads here and there, and it seemed like she was picking up on certain things, but her passivity just got in the way, or sometimes she would misread things at various points. I definitely do think that her age played a part in how she played the game, since I believe she was only 21 during the season, so she didn't really have the life experience. I already mentioned how I didn't like the edits trying to pop her up as being the only good person in her alliance, and I do think that she gets a lot of credit for certain things due to her archetype and demographic. I do appreciate how she spoke in her normal voice in the diary room, and how she wasn't painfully scripted like a lot of people were in this season and just in the last several seasons. So, in a way, I do appreciate her. Tyler wins HOH and nominates JC and Samantha for eviction, and Brett for some reason thought that Angela would be backdoored. And Samantha also thought this, as she rants to Tyler about how much of a bitch she finds Angela to be. Angela wins the veto and uses it on JC. She and Tyler make some lame, obnoxious speech about one step ahead, two steps ahead, as he nominates Brett as the replacement nominee. Brett is evicted in a 3-0 vote, which is unanimous. Brett is a weird one, since I did find him entertaining at points, but at the same time, I did find him to be very overrated, especially with how much the fan base hypes him up as someone who is so funny, comedic, charismatic, and how he played the game. It seemed like he just stuck with his group throughout the entire season without realizing that he was at the bottom of his alliance, while not utilizing Rachel to his advantage and not making more bonds with people outside of his alliance, or if he had more relationships with them, he would have been in a better position, as he was always the main target for that other side of the house. And even when the other side of the house dismantled, he was the target with his own side of the house. At the same time, I do think he had decent ideas strategically and seemingly knew what he needed to do to put himself in the best position, but he always just took so long to do it, and I think his procentric mentality heavily affected his gameplay, as he always saw things in one way, and it let him deter himself from potential relationships that he could have formed with other people. In general, I do find him to be a good casting choice, but I can't really find him to be very likable. And under another circumstance, I could easily see him being very unlikable. What is there really to say about week 12? It's a typical endgame week, and while JC did win a clutch competition, it didn't really bring much intrigue in general. JC is shocked with Brett's eviction, and he realizes he is on the outs for the first time in the season. Tyler thinks that it's the biggest blindside of the season, but it's funny because no one even mentions this when they talk about the biggest blindsides of the season in the fanbase. Samantha apologizes for everything she said about Angela to Angela, but neither of them are being genuine. Tyler was able to make amends with Samantha, but JC is a bit of a harder sell, though he has no one else but Tyler at this point, so JC kind of has to forgive Tyler. Angela wins HOH, and she mentions to Tyler and Casey that she wants Samantha gone first, since she became friends with a lot of the jurors before they were evicted. We have a scene of Tangela telling one another that they're in love with one another, and they're scared to death. And it's interesting watching this now, since we got to see how codependent they became, especially with how Tyler talked about Angela during All Stars 2, and how they broke up within the last year. JC knows that he is going on the block with Samantha and pressures Tyler to veto him so they can vote out Casey, but Tyler is not agreeing with it, and there's a lot of tension between them. We waste some time on BB Rexa, I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly, promoting her single before Angela nominates JC and Samantha for eviction. JC feels alone in the game, and he mentions that Tyler is too close to Angela, where he says that he hopes Angela nominates Casey if he wins the veto, and he will vote Casey out. Samantha is spending a bunch of time by herself, and Casey wins the veto, where of course she doesn't use it. Samantha is evicted in a unanimous 2-0 vote. Samantha can be entertaining and likable, especially with how much of a unique casting choice she is overall, and how she didn't care about the game, but she still played it in her own way. But I found that she ages a lot worse as time goes on. And rewatching it, I forgot how much of a male identified person she is, as she threw out a lot of nasty rhetoric towards the women in the season and gave every excuse possible for the men in the season, making the men helpless and making the women almost like sirens in a way. And seeing her kind of mentally deteriorate as the season went on was very uncomfortable to watch, and I know she quit a lot of times, or she tried to quit. In general, the show just wasn't for Samantha, but I do appreciate how she just went back to her normal life after this. So JC ends up winning the HOH, which breaks the trio's plan of them making it to finale nights together. JC is insistent on getting Angela out this round, so he nominates Angela and Tyler for eviction. Tyler decided to throw the veto since he didn't want to choose between Casey or Angela, and it seemed like he never considered taking Angela to the end when it absolutely would have benefited him and helped him a lot, since I do believe he wins if he goes to the end over Angela. And the fact that he never even considered going to the end with his showmance, which would have been understandable, is just really faulty in my opinion, and it kind of shows how he kind of dropped the ball as the season was coming to a close. Anyways, Casey wins the final veto of the season, and of course, Casey votes to evict Angela. So, a large part of me still kind of finds Angela to be pretty unlikable, as I don't appreciate her deciding to throw these shady, villainous speeches and acting like a biatch at times, but never really owns it or wants to deal with the backlash, as she ends up hiding in her room several times, and it's clear that she doesn't have the energy to pull that stuff off. At the same time, I kind of do appreciate her slowly opening up as the season went on, and I started to understand her mentality while watching her in the season as she explained her childhood and the things that happened to her. And I think there was a lot more that happened to her that was talked about on the feeds, but it wasn't shown on the episodes. While I don't find her to be really entertaining, I do appreciate that Angela wanted to play the game. She was willing to make cutthroat moves, even though she had to be aided by Tyler a lot of that time to do so. In general, she definitely had a lot of social issues, which is why a lot of the house guests, especially on the other side, just didn't like her at all. But at least she came in being unapologetically herself and playing an unapologetic game. So with week 13, I don't know if it's better because the ending was kind of controversial with who ended up winning and who got the runner up, but it's caused a lot of controversy and conversation over the last 5 years. So I guess it ends the season on a bit more of an exciting note, but depending on the person, it might end on a worse note because the predicted winner didn't end up winning. Tyler and Casey planned ahead of time for her to win part 1 and for him to win part 2, but that didn't go to plan since Tyler holds on and ends up winning part 1, though Casey doesn't doubt this at all. It doesn't really matter since Casey ends up winning part 2 in addition to part 3, so she becomes the final HOH and of course votes to evict JC. Honestly, JC irritated the crap out of me the entire season, and he made me cringe with just how vile he was towards the entire season. Not only with just consistently crossing boundaries with how he touched on certain people, but just all of the comments that he was making and how he treated people. Despite that, he was a good player, and he was a better player than I think everyone was expecting him to be, as he was able to miss the Faute side several times in the season, and he was the only other person outside of Tyler who did this time after time after time, and he was in the middle position of the game, though he technically was playing for an alliance that he technically wasn't a part of, since he was never in level 6, but he was always in affiliate. I do think that he was way too blinded by Tyler to really put himself in the best position possible, where he was actively playing in a position where he would never win or get to the end, and that's essentially what happened here, so his fate was kind of brought upon by himself. But in general, he's probably the person I like the least from the season, so moving on. Haley asks Tyler what were his big strategic moves outside of winning competitions, and he responds that he was in the level 6 and got close to JC and Samantha, mentioned getting the second power up, and played for 2 months without telling anyone, which I don't know why he kept on mentioning this when it's really irrelevant to his game. He was trying to get himself backdoored, and he had many other moves, but he went with this, where it wasn't really impressive at all, and it just kind of shows how he couldn't explain his game properly due to the format, though he knew of the format for the last 9 years since he was a fan of the show. Anyways, Brett asks Casey what were her best strategic moves without competitions, and she responds that she was going to rely on her social game, even over competitions, and was confident that it would take her far, where she created relationships with people over the first few weeks. Bailey asks Tyler about making the jurors bitter as they left and why should they vote for him, and he responds that he apologizes to her about their blow-up and mentioned that he had good relationships with everyone in the house, where he claimed that he intentionally made an enemy of someone in the jury house, where he put his glasses and drank his coffee, and mentioned that it wasn't personal. I don't buy that he intentionally made an enemy out of Bailey so he can have an enemy injury. I think that was just BS. Angela asks KC about another layer to the game outside of winning vetoes and not using them, and Casey repeats that she had relationships with people on the other side of the house. What I notice with Casey and her answers is that she keeps on repeating the same thing over and over and over again, and I think it's because she didn't really have many moves outside of winning competitions and not using them. Samantha asks Tyler why he deserves to win over Casey, and he responds that he had good relationships with everyone in the house, but he knew what was happening every single week, and he had a plan in place behind the scenes, making moves, and he intentionally made himself appear like a dumb surfer, and he is a superfan. Another thing is Julie kept on cutting Tyler and Casey off with their answers, so they couldn't really answer as fully as they wanted to because she was always chirping in, which was a sign that they should stick with the older jury format, but that's clearly not happening, especially after 10 years at the point of the season and 15 years at the point of me recording this. Scotty asks Casey why she deserves to win over Tyler, and she responds that she has watched the show since the beginning and she had relationships with people where she cheered people up like Haley and Bailey. Casey's final speech is about watching the show since the beginning and using her social skills from the beginning and working with Level 6 and JC, as she played a loyal game by not making promises that she knew she couldn't keep. Tyler's final speech is about being a big target and knowing that he could win competitions, where he hit his super fandom being key for him since he played on being the doe-eyed boy. He was told about Sam's power app, and it was why she made it past the first week, mentions getting the power app, which didn't expire until Facial's eviction week, and played like he didn't have it, also mentioning that he told Bailey that Scotty was his number one to get her to nominate Scotty if she was pissed off at him during her HOH. Tyler started to ramble and mentioned backdooring Brett, though it wasn't a backdoor since he was the final six and he played in veto, and Julie cuts him off. Casey wins the season in a 5-4 vote. It's interesting watching this now instead of 5 years ago, where at the time there was huge hype about Tyler, not only just as a player but as a personality. And I realized during this rewatch that Tyler doesn't really have a big personality and he wasn't really entertaining. While he did play the game a lot, and I give him credit for the borderline masterful game that he played during the season and causing a lot of chaos, it was due to his gameplay and not his personality. And I think things were more chaotic because of the personalities of the Falte/Hive side of the house. It seemed like he was really reveling in making all these crazy moves and backstabbing people, but once he was called out or got flack from it by Bailey, he kind of backed off and he started focusing a lot more on his relationship with Angela to the point where he started alienating people like Samantha and stopped focusing on maintaining relationships with a lot of the people in the house. And I do think that's why he lost some crucial votes. Essentially, this season is the season of Tyler, and because he didn't win, it's essentially the season of Tyler losing, as he had complete focus and narration from the beginning to the end, and he was easily the most important person in the season. I definitely saw a lot more of his mistakes as a game player, but Tyler played better than everyone else by far. And while I don't dislike Tyler, I'm not really obsessed or that into him as a personality or a character. Casey is Casey. She's always going to stick with her group of people while not really caring much about people not in her group and will backstab people not in her group. But because she is such a low personality and she's very easygoing, people will definitely overlook her faults. When it comes to the strategy in this season, she definitely wasn't strategic and she definitely had to be led on by what was going on in the house. And Tyler definitely did a lot of the legwork, where even Angela was more aware of certain things. But the difference is, Casey had a better social game than Angela and didn't come off as a bitch. And because of her natural personality, she's someone who's always going to make it far in the season, despite her being saved by the hacker twist, arguably. Casey definitely did start kicking it up competition-wise during the last month of the season, which put her in a position where she was able to carve her own path, which just happened to be staying loyal to her alliance. As a character and a personality, there really isn't much to discuss, though her forced and scripted confessionals in the season really rubbed me the wrong way. I guess it caused me to appreciate how she isn't scripted in the challenge a bit more, But in general, Casey was very much a passenger in the season. But she's harmless enough in general. In conclusion, I definitely do think Big Brother 20 revamped the show in a way that was much needed after a long streak of seasons that were just less than stellar, with the exceptions of 14, 17, and 18, as it was one of the few seasons that genuinely had a split house from the very beginning to the very end, and there were some big personalities that caused for a lot of interesting dynamics throughout the season. And the power apps weren't even used in the season, so that part was really good. Unfortunately, the hacker twist really derailed the season, as I think things would have been a lot more interesting for at least a few more weeks had the hacker twist not happened. But in a way, the season was always controlled by Level 6, through mainly Tyler during the first two-thirds of the season, as he maneuvered a lot of what was happening in the season. So while the Fate and Hive side of the house won power, they never really had power because they always mismanaged the votes, even in the weeks where they were HOH. And then when they were all gone, we just saw Level 6 continue on, and they didn't really have engaging personalities, so when it was just them, the season got a lot more boring. Overall, this season was fun to watch, and I think that's something that was missing throughout a lot of the seasons before the season and a lot of the seasons after the season, where they're just not fun and they're not interesting. I don't know where I'm going to rank this season, as I don't know if it's going to be above 17 or 18, and I don't know where it will compare to a lot of the older seasons, where I could easily see me ranking this in the top 10, though I could see me ranking it in the upper middle tier, but outside of the top 10. It'll be interesting ranking this cast into Game Players tiers rankings, because I don't think very highly of a lot of them, and so many of them are just complete train wrecks. But that is my experience with Big Brother 20. I heavily enjoyed the first half more than I enjoyed a lot of Big Brother, and then the second half I didn't enjoy, but I don't even think it was as awful as many second halves of the season, so I don't even know if that would derail my opinion of the season too much. There is a reason why this cast is one of the few casts of the last decade that has consistently been on TV and been on other programs, and the dynamics of this cast is ever changing and why we consistently follow it. So I think there's something special about this cast. Anyways, that is my journey and recap and review of Big Brother 20. Thank you all for following me, and I'll be back with more videos soon. You can follow me on Twitter at LalaAmi, where I discuss a whole lot of things. I'm going to definitely continue this, and I think I'll be finished 25 by the time BB Can 12 airs, and then I'll air my ranking list of everyone in BB Can up to that point. And yeah, so thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with something soon. Bye!